Welcome back to Programming TV. I'm your host, Ben Wise, and today we're going to be looking at some program design for a taper week for one of my one-on-one athletes. So as I mentioned, this is a real client of mine. He is 34 years old currently, but he's going to age up into the 35 to 39, the youngest Masters division. So technically he's not 35 yet, but because of where his birthday falls, he's going to fall there for the game season. And as a result, he also gets a certain a lot of other events in the off season now, the fall. Into the winter, we'll actually use the next year's games sort of cutoff dates for their invite. So actually he can get into certain Masters comps at the 34-year-old mark even before the game season, which is pretty cool. So he recently did a qualifier for Legends, which is a CrossFit competition. It's going to come up sometime in December. We don't have an exact date yet. So that's really his big priority, to take that as seriously as he can and to do as well as he possibly can. Everything else, he's a team comp that's coming up in October. That's all sort of just a build-up. So you'll see that we don't even go through a pre-competition phase to get there. It's really all the focus is moving towards December and then possibly some of the game season, but really December is the first time that we're going to be thinking about really trying to peak hard and get our best performance. So again, this is someone who's been in fitness for a long time. He's been at sort of what's called a sub-elite level in the individual, the open category for a really long time. And that being said, I think he's going to be one of the top athletes to kind of watch and keep your eye on in 2023 for the Masters competition. Besides that, I mean, really for him, it was like we're reestablishing a base. He was continuing to train. He's someone who's a coach, and just like that's lifestyle is important to him, but it's different than really gearing up and going super being really diligent on top of your training. That's required to be really good in the sport, regardless if you're a Masters or not. And in fact, as many of my Masters athletes know, this is going to be more important for Masters than often other people who can get away with a little bit more if you're younger. Besides that, it was just sort of building up the tolerances, the sport movements again, everything from squat patterns to hanging gymnastics to continue to work and refine his lifting technique and his handstand push-up positions and tolerance and all that stuff. So really, it's not super complicated in terms of like what the priorities that we need to work on. It's pretty stuff that, like, again, he's been working on these same priorities for a while. I'm pretty familiar with him and with the things that he needs, and it's more so just like, okay, let's start to lay the foundation for the more like exciting type training that will come down the road as we get closer to the competition. So that being said, let's jump into it. So as you can see, this is our current week, August 29th right here. And this right here at the top is the current template that we're following. This was sort of his first limiter phase. Again, you might call it a base building, sort of getting back into training, getting everything firing again, making sure that we're, again, establishing a base so that when we get into more intensive training down the road, it's going to allow and actually support that. So you can see some of his individual priorities, how they laid them out in the week. Here's actually the week prior to where we're going. So this is sort of the last week of what we're calling limiter 1, or sort of that base phase. We will then be deloading for 4 days before we get into limiter 2, which is going to be very similar, right? Someone who's been training for close to a decade in the sport, like the things that they need to work on at this point in their career are, I don't want to say static, but they're very consistent, right? Like even for myself, right? I haven't been training in CrossFit for a decade, but I guarantee you, like if I'm still competitive, by the time I get to like the decade mark, that I'm still going to be working on my squat strength. I'm still going to be working on building up my clean, right? I'm still going to be working on my snatch maxes, right? Not that that's always the biggest priority in training, but certainly the things that you're working on are pretty consistent. So you're going to see the things that we're working on in limiter 1 really just kind of roll over, and we tweak a few things. We rearrange some of the things in the program. We might attack them in a little bit different way, but the things that we're actually working on, like the base priorities, are very, very similar, if not the same. Also, we know that Mayhem is going to be programming Legends in December, so there's certain things that, I've seen plenty of Mayhem's programming. They have certain style, as everybody knows, of the way that they write things, so it's important that I have that in mind as well. So let's start to construct his week and get into it. So first things first, I always will be checking to see what he did in the previous weeks. So obviously, I'm going to be going through looking at his past results, seeing how he's feeling, and overall things are, again, with a Masters athlete and someone who's pretty consistent like that, you're going to see this is sort of as expected. Again, this is a limiter phase, so it's not super complicated. Again, I really just want to make sure that we're not carrying any additional residual fatigue, and that's really why we're deloading more than the fact that he's feeling super trashed, and that's why we have to deload. So we're kind of staying on top of that. It's just a way that we can pull back the volume a little bit, pull back the intensity a little bit, but it doesn't have to be all pulled, backed off really aggressively. Again, it's not like he's coming off a competition and we're deloading like that. This is, again, just sort of a transitional phase that allows us to, okay, let's pull back some of the fatigue, make sure that we're feeling fresh and everything's feeling good, and then we'll continue on. So I've already established what I want the next cycle in terms of the template to be. So I'm going to pull that over. I wrote that right here. So I will push that into his new programming. And again, you'll see that didn't change much. If we look at this, it didn't change much from limiter 1 to limiter 2. Again, there's certain things that are rearranged, but the general structure of the week, the focuses, they're very, very similar. It's just tweaked a little bit and a little bit, again, a fresh take on sort of the same thing. You could almost think of it as. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually sort of build out the second half of his week, because that's going to be a little bit more consistent. And the first thing that is going to be present in his program that I know is going to be there is the name game. So let's go to Saturday. That's when the name game is. It's also snatch strength, which I know is in the protocol. So I'm going to pull that session from there. Let's push that right here. So the next thing is this recovery day right here is going to be very similar or potentially the same. So we'll make sure. Again, this doesn't necessarily need to be progressed a whole lot. I mean, I certainly can, and I do tend to change it up a little bit just to like keep things fresh. But again, the things that he needs to work on from a movement perspective, the ranges of motion, the mobility restrictions that he has is pretty consistent week over week. So let's take that. We'll pull down this part of the week too, although I'm going to modify it fairly heavily. I'll pull from there. We'll mark that as sort of blue as my color code for a deload. So for him, there was in the AM, and this was for also went for the cycle previous to this, but it was basically that he's doing just some general cyclical work in the mornings 3 times a week. You can see the one was sort of blended cyclical, which is basically saying that we were on multiple ergs or multiple modalities. AM on Wednesday before was just a trail run. I'm going to turn that into more of a fartlek run. Fartlek is a Swedish term that means speed play, if anyone's wondering. Again, Thursday was his recovery day. Friday was when we had that air bike session in the morning. And then, again, I think it was actually snatch work here before. Now we're putting a more clean jerk focused work, especially the jerk, because his leg strength's really good. And then Saturday, we'll move the strength session over there for snatch. So I still want him on the ergs, even though this is a recovery week or a deload week. So, but we want the intensity to be low. So really, I would just think about limiting this, not necessarily in terms of volume, but bringing the intensity way down. I'm making sure it's very easy. So I'm also going to probably pull out any bounding that he has and maybe have him do a little bit of additional mobility work. So I will probably actually just put in my the O2 reload protocol that I use a lot, in which it's simple but it works really well. So you could do any duration you want, but it's typically 5 to 8 rounds of 3 minutes of. I'll just give him a choice erg, and this is going to be nasal and zone 0. Zone 0 is like obnoxiously easy, especially if you're someone who's been going into some intensive training. It's like, man, this is way too easy. Like, it feels like this is even worth my time almost. Which what that does is it just allows for you to push blood into the muscle. But again, you're not really ever getting to the point where you're stripping out oxygen quicker than you can replace it. So it's oxygenating work. That's why I call it an O2 reload. One of the things that allows that heart rate to stay really low is by having either some foam rolling, or like mobility work, right? Again, that's just going to be choice, really up to them. You can see there's a lot that's up to the athlete. They're an experienced athlete. They know what they're doing here, so I don't need to spend a ton of time on that. So let's go into the PM. So one of the things, again, I've thought about these warm-ups a lot and I've built them out. So I don't need to reinvent the wheel if I know that this kind of thing is working. So I will largely leave some of this warm-up stuff untouched. I will tweak it over time. Here, again, I'm just going to have 5 minutes cyclical. I'm actually going to bump up this Turkish volume get up quite a bit. And I'm just going to allow that to be pretty light. Again, really, it's an open chain exercise. It allows a lot of shoulder stability, takes the shoulder through a full range of motion, and also ties in the core. So I'm a really big fan of that. And I'm going to pull up this just to kind of match that. Again, T-spine opener, you're going to hit lat, teres, even some pec in that. But obviously the T-spine is what being targeted the most. And then the PVC dislocates, I'm going to pull that into this C complex. All right, so I'm going to make this C4, and we're going to go 4x8. We're also going to make this weighted. When you're in a deload week, you can spend just a little bit more time on things that are a little bit more detailed and nuanced because you're not having to spend as much time on actual stressful work. So it's great for that kind of thing. All right, that is his warm-up. I'm pretty happy with that. I might even back this down to 65. And same thing here. And I'm going to make this from seated just to make sure the joints aren't being stressed too much. Okay, so his snatches, again, I really want this to just be technical, really pretty easy, skill work. So let's call it a 8x1.1. So these are cluster sets. That'll be 16 total reps. We're going to go 65%. And again, he was doing 5x3 touch and go after building to a heavy single. So obviously intensity's pulled way back. The volume is still decent, but really that's just to kind of maintain a touch on the movement and make sure that it's feeling crisp when you get back to it next week versus if you pull out all the volume entirely, it's not going to feel great when you get back to that same movement that next week. Like it'll take a little bit of time to kind of get the feel of it. So rather than doing that, I'd rather see a little bit of volume kept in there, but pull the intensity back. So I'm actually going to keep that pause front squat, but I'm actually going to give him reps at that. So we're going to go 5x2. So that means that both of those are pausing. And we're going to make it, again, fairly light. We'll make it 70% of his front squat. Again, I don't really care what the RPE is because I know it's going to be pretty low. And then, so this is where it's going to change a little bit because normally we're going to go into ring muscle up running and ring muscle up chunking. So like working on bigger sets of ring muscle ups while also running. They're complementary movement patterns, right? There's not a lot of interference there besides just like breathing and respiratory fatigue. So, but I'm not going to have him doing a lot of that kind of work on his deload week. So rather what I'm going to do is I'm going to give him some ring muscle up skill work. So basically here we're going to go like every 90 seconds times. I know I'm going to have him do triples. So it'll be 3 ring muscle ups. Realistically, he's been doing 30 plus ring muscle ups in this Monday session. So I think somewhere around the neighborhood of 21 to 24 in this format will be plenty. I'd rather keep it on the low end. We'll go 21. So that would be 7 sets. And really for him here, the goal is to make these as easy and pretty as possible. All right. And then again, the movement work that we have on this day is going to be shoulder health and range of motion. So basically some shoulder accessory stuff, which is again very similar to what we had here. The squatting victory, again, just kind of working the back half of the shoulders. Seated bicep stretch is working or opening up pec minor, obviously biceps. The ring support holds, finger facing wrist stretch, and some banded external rotations. This I'm going to pull off that, so it just gives it a little bit of variation. I don't think he's going to need this week. And again, I would really like to see this be more like 4 to 5. I don't want the volume getting crazy, but I definitely want him spending some time on it. We're going to bump this up too. All right, August 30th. So in the morning, I'm having him do just some general joint health and spine health things. I'm actually going to give him some walking. Walking is great because it allows you to move through extension and flexion of the hips. It, again, is moving synovial fluid around, obviously the circulation benefits. Just being outside and, not being at a computer, which he's at a computer a lot during his day. Things like that make a big difference. So we're going to give him the walking apnea routine. This is 20 minutes on the minute. You're exhaling and holding your breath until an RPE 8. So it's a breath pause. It's taxing, but it's also not going to be stressful on the joints. Again, you're just walking. So it's chemically a little bit stressful. Mentally, it might be a little bit stressful, but it's also not super exaggerated either. So I think that's a great option for his deload week. Into his PM session, which is actually the meat and potatoes of what he's doing. So I'm having him do the clean jerk warm up, but after part 1, which is just the cyclical component, I'm having him do end range isometrics in a 90-90 position. So again, it's basically driving. You can actually see it here. He's pushing internally rotated knee as hard as you can against the floor. And then you're going to relax, do it again, relax, do it again. And then you'll switch sides and press down with the other knee. You'll switch back and forth doing that 3 times. And again, that's sort of a pails and rails. It's a functional range conditioning technique, but I think it's really useful because, again, he's got some limitations in hip internal rotation. All right, that's the clean jerk warm up. Again, we're going into a power clean and 2 split jerks, and we're making sure, again, this is all really technique focused work here. You're going to see that he's doing a pause in the split to make sure that he can feel all 5 toes. He often gets away from that inter-rotation and that back foot can kick out a little bit. So making sure that that back hip is sort of blocked off against in range, internally rotated is super important. So it's basically claiming that range, and then we're using that range in those jerks. So I'm actually going to leave that pretty close. I'm going to add a 3rd split jerk, and I'm going to move this down to 1 second. Just so we can feel it quick, move back, but he's accumulating quite a few reps. And then I'm actually going to have him do full range of motion here. So it's going to be a squat clean, and I'm actually going to have him do a push jerk. So it's going to be very similar to what D was for this week, but we're going to make it where it's very not voluminous. So we're going to have him build to push jerk. The push jerk is going to be the limiter there. His squat clean is really good. So build to, let's call it 85% for a single. And again, I'm just making sure that the athletes are getting the intention of the workout that I want. So I'm going to say that the goal is to get there. Well, I'll just say get there. Get there in less than 7 singles. All right, we're going to do some touch and go push press because I'm going to get him inverted a little bit, but I'm not going to necessarily do a ton of strict handstand push-up volume. And that's something that he's continuing to work on. So the thing that happens with push press sometimes is people let their ribs flare out and they get into a really kind of nasty position. So it's making sure that that doesn't happen and that we're making, being precise in how we actually move so it carries over to handstand push-ups the way that you want them to look when you're doing, for example, like a strict handstand push-up workout. So these touch and go push presses, I'm going to make it, I don't want to really do more than 5 sets. We'll go 5 by 5. But we're going to keep it at like RPE 5 to 6, which is, again, pretty easily. And again, I'm going to write him a little note just saying, keeping the ribs down and pushing the bar back to or the base of the neck. So thinking about pushing the bar back sort of behind you allows you to actively open up that shoulder a little bit more. That's an external cue instead of an internal cue. I'm going to have him just do a little bit of interval work with handstand push-ups, but nothing that's anywhere close to being as stressful as this was here previous week. So You're going to see the goal moving forward is going to be going into more sports sets that's aerobic and also doing some inversion work with specifically handstand push-ups on these weeks. So I'll give him some aerobic, but he's already done a fair amount of work for a deload up to this point, so I don't want him doing too much. So we'll go E here is, we'll just make this an EMOM so I can control the rest work. We're not going to make it super long. You know, we're going to have him do some clusters. Let's go 5, 4, 3. Actually, I'm going to back it off even more than that. We're going to go 5. We're going to go 4, 3, 2. So that's 7, 8, 9 handstand push-ups on that minute. But again, I'm going to make sure that he gets 2 full minutes of rest, or not rest, but non-pressing work so he can actually recover. And actually, I'm going to have him do some extra pulling work and put him back onto an erg. So we'll make that sort of a little bit of interference, but not a lot. So it'll mainly just be upper back that this is sort of a potentially a bit of an issue with. So we'll go 12 cal row. Let it take, we'll say about 40, 45 seconds. Because you could really easily rip that out and make it more of a sprint. I want him to spread it out and make it pretty easy. That's pretty low calories per hour right there. And then here we're going to do some dumbbell prone rows. So let's say, again, I just know him. It's going to be, 8 dumbbell prone rows with 50 a handle will be fairly easy, and that's what I want. That's 12-minute EMOM, and then we're going to have him go back into his movement work here. So hip flexor triangles, just as it sounds, working hip flexor. Tuck hold on parallettes. I'm actually going to have him do a hanging tuck hold. Reason being, it just ties in the core in a different way, but also it's going to, anytime you're hanging, it just allows for the rotator cuff to be acted a little bit more, and he hasn't done a lot of abuse to it, just 21 muscle ups the day before, which for him is no big deal. So that'll be fine. Tuck hold. We'll leave it at 4 by 20 seconds. And we did the seated bicep stretch yesterday. Not that that's a problem to do stretch 2 days in a row, but I'm going to have him do the table gut glute bridge. Instead, we'll do 12 reps. Again, it's one of the things you're going to see here is I leave the intention of the workout very similar, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit, maybe give a different variation of an exercise that is basically hitting the same thing, but in a slightly different way, or, biasing a different thing just to, again, have the intention behind it that you want. I'm going to leave the trap neck and wrist care in there. Again, he's spending a lot of time on a computer, so I'll leave that there. I'm going to slow down this breathing just a touch. Again, leave it in there, but manipulate it just a hair. Okay, let's move on to the 31st. So we're going to leave the trail run. However, we're going to make it a fartlek now instead of just continuous work. So this way, in future weeks, he's going to bump up the intensity and allow him to run harder, which is going to mimic like Metcons or other things that could have running in it a little bit more closely to what will be sport-specific work down the road. For now, we're going to keep the intensity fairly low. We'll do 10 to 15 rounds and keep it pretty open-ended, because again, if you're on a trail, depending where you're at, it might be a loop, it might be an out and back, it might be different courses. You don't know how far it is from the person's house. There's a lot of factors that you just don't know. So it's not like you're on like an air run or something. So I like leaving a little bit broader constraints on that type of thing. So let's have it go 1 minute run, 1 minute walk. Extremely simple. And we're going to make the run at cruise. And here, cruise is typically zone 2, but that's like my language that I use for zone 2. However, with the walk in between, his heart rate might drop down into zone 1, and that's fine. I'll just tell him to keep the runs smooth and form focused. And that's just something that most athletes kind of do naturally. I'm actually going to give him our bounding prep routine. Bounding prep routine plus, and that's just some like, walking calf raises, some bounders, some different types of skips like A skips and B skips, calf poppers and things like that. And then afterwards, I'm actually going to have him go into 2-3 rounds of kneeling hip flexor stretch. 30-second calf stair stretch. And 30-second glute medialis stretch per side. And lastly, we'll have him do a 1-minute frog stretch, which is for the adductors. Actually, I'm going to add one more thing, which is going to be the walk with breath sync afterwards, which is just sort of a parasympathetic protocol to bring him down after. This isn't intense work, but what will be tense work down the road. All right, so Wednesday PM, we're going to have him get onto the machine, warm up a little bit. This is the pistol preparation that I basically built out and have used a few weeks now, and I've tweaked it a little bit and slowly start to build the volume of certain movements and pull back on others, etc. Now I'm going to take this exact same thing, but I'm going to build in legless rope climbs. You're going to see in the template, I have pistols and legless rope climbs as sort of a pairing. I want that to be skill-based, not super capacity-based for now. Later on, we're going to build more fatigue into those movements. But for now, I really want the quality of those movements staying as high as possible and making sure that we're prepping really well for that. Because if you're prepped for legless rope climbs and pistols, you can probably get into overhead squat positions pretty well fairly quickly. So let's add some rope climb prep in here. We're going to put one onto this A series. We're just going to have him do some supinated scat pull-ups, which just mimics the shoulder position of a legless rope climb a little bit more. B, we have these ATG split squats, and we're going to add now some rope pull to stands. So basically sitting on your butt or sort of, on your back on the floor almost, and you're pulling hand over hand, getting yourself up to a stand. We'll go 3x2 there. Band assisted pistol holds. I'm going to leave that. Band assisted pistols. D2. We're going to put in rope climbs here. Rope climb. This is just a regular rope climb with your legs. 2x1. So singles. Actually, I'm going to put that same thing, change my mind, right here. Rope climb. Again, that's only 4 singles. It's just sort of building in some additional warm-up. Then pistols with a counterbalance. And I'm actually going to start to build in some of his. This is probably going to be the extent of the legless rope climbs that he gets on this day. So it'll be legless rope climb. We'll go 2x1. Once again, pistols 2x8. F2. Legless rope climb. We'll go 2x1. So that's 4 legless rope climbs, 4 regular rope climbs, which again is still really low volume. So I'm going to bump him up 1 additional, which is actually a progression from last week for the pistols too. I'm keeping it really low intentionally, but it allows that to just progress a bit. All right, so next is some additional prep work to get into his overhead squats, really just prepping shoulders in the range of motion, where we did pulling and overhead in the legless rope climbs, but now it's allowing it to, the wrist position and just the shoulder position it demands of. It's more of a pressing movement. It's obviously static, but it's more of a press than a pull. So it's important to prep for that and get the shoulders still ready. So we're going to leave this again. Actually, I'm going to add 1 set instead of having it just be a single set. Trick get up. So again, I'm going to pull this up a bit in terms of volume, and then we're going to pull this out. You can see I had him do a test last week. But now it's just going to be some overhead squat sort of maintenance work. So let's have it be 4x6. I want the tempo to be, again, let's more challenging. 4-2-X1, so 4-second lower, 2-second pulse at the bottom, explode back up, 1-second reset at the top. And I'm going to prescribe these at 155, which is significantly lighter than what he has been doing and what he's capable of doing, which is where the point of a deload. So lastly, let's see. Normally we'd be doing some hinging work in GHDs and then into some rate-focused pain, which is saying that you're going through movements at a high clip, and that's also going to have an erg-based power element to it. So let's instead just accumulate some really quality hinging and GHD work. So this will be sort of global flexion extension, and we'll keep the intensity saved for another week. So let's say accumulate, this is one of my favorite ways of writing this kind of stuff. I'm just going to have him go up to 75 GHDs, and we'll say 75 RDLs. These are dumbbell RDLs. And for the RDLs, I want him to trace down his shins. Make sure there's a nice big range of motion there. All right, and then femoral quads. Again, he did some squatting earlier in the week. The quads just tend to get hot a lot in CrossFit, so it's something that's just good to keep in. Again, we're going to go back to the kneeling hip flexor stretch from this morning. Again, we just did a bunch of GHD, so it kind of makes sense to do that. And then we're also going to be doing the supine hamstring stretch. Again, between running this morning, GHDs, and all those hinging that we just did with the RDLs, even though they were light and form-focused, I think it's good to hit, again, some additional hamstring mobility work. Moving on to September 1st, new week. This has historically been his recovery day. Obviously, all of this is sort of recovery-based, being a deload. I have him walking again. Again, that's mainly for spine health and just some of the low-level aerobic qualities. Again, choice spine health. I'm going to leave that in there. And then is these tabletop glute bridges and seated bicep stretch. I'm also going to be adding, again, just some stuff for his hips because his hips are tight in general. We're going to do 10, 90, 90 hip rotations. People call these windshield wipers, same thing. And I'm going to leave this. This is supine breathing at a 4-second inhale, 8-second exhale tempo or cadence. I'm going to make this session just a touch longer here and a touch longer here. That's how I've been progressing it in past weeks. I'm going to leave that one more week. After this week, I'm going to pull that back a little bit. I'm not going to progress him to an hour total of cyclical work on his recovery day. Certainly could, but I just don't think it's necessary for him. Okay, so this middle section I'm going to leave fairly the same. There are just going to be a few things I shift a little bit. I'm going to leave the ring support tuck hold. However, I'm going to add a seated L-sit raise. So you're sitting on your butt, lifting your legs out in front of you into an L-sit. Again, there's those 90-90 hip rotations. I'm going to leave that. So that's 2 days in 1 day. The saddle pose, I'm going to bump that up a bit. Natural leg extension with the band assist, I'm going to leave that. And so ostrich walk again, hip flexion, strict toes to bar. I'm going to move that to a strict hanging knee raise. We'll bump that. Those are pretty easy, so we're going to go 10 to 12, but I probably could go 12 to 15, but there's no reason to push it. Ring dip holds. I'm going to put the feet on the floor for this. Just to make it more of a stretch and less tension-based. We're just going to make this a supinated dead hang again. Again, supinated just kind of opens up both forearms if you're pronated a lot on a laptop, and then additionally for all the rope climb work and other stuff that's going on. We're going to move these prone shoulder cars to prone shoulder circles, which people probably think is the same thing, but I've demos and it's not. They're a little bit different. Both arms at the same time. We're going to actually shift this into an E2, E1, just to make those flip-flopping back and forth. And we'll do the same thing here, making that a nice little trio, but we're going to bump this time down. And again, those are the kind of adjustments that they're very subtle, not much of a difference, but it kind of keeps things a little bit fresh for the athlete. And overall, that's more of a stimulus of what I'm looking for. There's a few areas that I pulled out some stress that I don't think is necessary. So now one of the things that is going to be important is that, okay, we know what September 3rd is because this is the name game. September 3rd. And you'll see here, there's a few things that we touch on, but it's snatch strength and a few different in a complex, and then in singles, building to heavy. So this is him coming off of his deload. So you want sort of a transitional day where it's not like super hard back into it all of a sudden, but also not really touching super hard on some of the traditional CrossFit movements that we're going to see in the Metcon, which is thrusters, pull-ups, front rack lunge, chest to bar, overhead squat, bar muscle up. So that's sort of what's in my mind as I think about, okay, we have these items, but also want to make sure that we're not overdoing it in any aspect between coming off the deload, but then also what you're going to be hitting in tomorrow's session. So the AM, we got gymnastics, which is going to be more body weight based because he's at his house with an air bike. So let's have him to go 30-minute air bike at smooth pace. And again, here's Z1 to Z2. If you can recall, this was cruise at Z1, Z2. However, walking in between is certainly a little bit different than doing gymnastics in between. So at 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 minutes, we're going to have him perform 3 complexes of a wall walk plus a wall facing handstand push-up. And then we're actually going to have him do a plank this time. We're going to make it a contralateral plank. Contralateral plank per side or per way. And that way, that's something where it's getting a little bit more midline wall walk, and a wall facing handstand push-up is a little bit more midline taxing already. And I'd rather have that on his, again, sort of coming off this deload period than really focused on a lot of tricep tension, because again, there's just plenty of time to kind of get back into that sort of hard training. I'd rather see it be more something that's going to, again, promote health and recovery. Even though we're technically not into the deload anymore, it's not like it's, okay, we're here and then we're not. It's a little bit more blended than that. And after this, we're going to have him go into his spine health routine. For the PM, we're going to have him do 4 rounds at a warm-up pace. We'll go 12 barbell front rack rotations, 10 alternating step-ups, 8 strict press, a 30-second elevated cat pose. I'm actually going to have him interlock his fingers. And then 20-second handstand hold on the wall. I want him focusing on pushing his chest forward and shoulders open. And I know I'm actually going to have him do a tester this week. One of the KPIs that I want, the key performance indicators that I want him doing for Legends is over here. So I'm actually going to pull this over. I planned these out ahead of time. And one of them that I want is this right here. So that's obviously going to be important, and that's sort of the big thing that we're going to be gearing up for in this particular session. If that's all he really gets in, that's quality. I'm happy with that. If I can spell Legends. So again, that's the big thing that I'm worried about. 300-meter run, which is sort of off. What people normally do is 400 or 200 is kind of in between. 8 sandbag cleans, and then a 60-foot handstand walk. I'm going to say, actually, I'm going to modify this on the fly a bit. 30-foot unbroken sections, which shouldn't be any issue at all. It's just a little bit of like mental strain, if anything. I'm going to make sure I note that I made it that updated. Okay. So that's the big thing here. I want him doing some cuff health after this. So we'll go 5 minutes. easy air bike plus our banded shoulder health routine. Okay, so here we're having some split jerks from the rack. Actually, I'm going to have him do some triple pause split jerks, which is a pause in the dip, in the split, in the recovery. Triple pause split jerk from the rack. We'll have him go, we're going to have him do quite a few here. 10 doubles at, we'll go 55 to 65% of 1RM STO. And next, I'm going to have him go into some intervals with a clean jerk and an inversion component was what it normally will be. We already did a bunch of inversion. So we did wall walks and handstand push-ups in the morning. We're doing handstand walking in the Metcon. So I'm not going to give him more inversion work or overhead pressing. So I'd rather see him do something that is horizontal press here. However, oftentimes people do horizontal pressing, their chest gets really tight, especially if you don't have a great overhead position. And that's something we've been trying to work on in Hammer. So I'd like to see him go through a really big range of motion, which the easiest way to do that is with some deficit work. So I'm actually going to have him do some deficit push-ups in combination with his clean jerks. Again, that's not going to be a ton of fatigue because I want the KPI to be the biggest priority in this session. So that being said, we're going to go every 2 minutes, figure out how many sets in a bit. We're going to go 1.1.1 with a power clean and push jerk. We're going to make that, again, fairly light. We'll go 65%. AMRAP minus 3 deficit push-ups. So the deficit is 3.5 inches. So basically putting your hands on 45-pound plates, chest to the floor, and then stopping 3 reps in reserve. And again, he's not going to get to a point where that's going to take him like, a minute to get through. Like that's just not going to happen. So yeah, that should be, maybe pretty close to a 1-to-1 work rest. And again, I don't need that being a ton of sets. Your chest is going to get blown up pretty quickly. And again, for the power clean push jerks, I don't want them to get super high volume either. So realistically, I'm going to just put 4 sets. And that will probably get pulled out. I might keep something similar with the power clean push jerk and bump up the percentage. And rather than trying to progress the push-ups, I'll probably move that to something that is more of a vertical pressing motion or gets him inverted in some capacity, depending what the Metcon is. Again, the other thing that I got to think about is what's coming up the next day. I don't want him doing a bunch of squatting because we got thrusters and some other stuff coming up. And then I just want him, he's a smart guy. He's been doing this for a long time. So I'm just going to have him say prep movements and perform a rehearsal. Perfect. So there you have it. That was a deload week for one of my athletes. If you found this helpful, like this video and leave us a comment if you have something specific that you'd like us see attack or put out something like this in terms of educational content in the future. Be sure to let us know.